Some people will look you dead in the eye, straight face, and say that Doctor Who used to be a kids' show. These people clearly forgot about Dalek mutations, the Wirren, and reckless abandonment of companions in Aberdeen. With that in mind, I'm Sean Ferrick for Who Culture, and this is the story of how Hammer Horror led to Doctor Who's most popular episodes. Cast your minds back to the 1970s, where Doctor Who had just about been going for about a decade and was already becoming a popular icon of Saturday evening television. Dalek Mania had taken the world by storm and had led to several movies, comic books, and children's toys that helped cement the imagery of Doctor Who as a staple of British culture. Whilst the show had overcome many unique challenges to its production already, such as having changed the lead actors repeatedly and adapting to the world of colour, the overarching challenge that every member of the production team would have had to concern themselves was, how do we keep Doctor Who relevant? So, how did the production team of the 1970s manage to turn a show that was a fairly popular adventure series into the juggernaut of British television that was the Tom Baker era of 1974 to 1981, with an iconic Doctor and episodes that continue to reach the top amongst fan polls? The answer lies in the popularity of the horror movie industry at the time. Approaching the end of the Jon Pertwee era and heading into the series with Tom Baker in 1974 allowed the new producer of Doctor Who, Philip Hinchcliffe, to take the show in a new direction that could help to differentiate not only each actor's Doctor, but also the genres of the show. The series had always paralleled itself with what was popular of the era. For example, the first and second Doctor eras valued history and science fiction during the era of the Space Age. And the third Doctor era of the early 1970s took inspiration from action and espionage tropes. Where children had been drawn to the whimsy of modern technology and creatures, the adults have been drawn into the Bond-esque charm of the Pertwee era. Hinchcliffe realised he needed to capitalise on a demographic that hadn't yet been targeted by the production: young adults. It just so happened that Hollywood was making leaps and bounds within this exact demographic, with an increased popularity of graphic and intense imagery within horror movies. Even though the horror industry had long been a successful genre for Hollywood, with hits like Hitchcock's Psycho already a cult classic, the nature of horror at the time tended to be more reliant on the psychological, relying on nightmare scenarios to scare its audience. It was only during this decade that the intensity of movies such as The Exorcist and Jaws would shock the industry, becoming instant successes largely due to the water-cooler nature of both. The Exorcist dared to challenge religious belief and fear of the devil, and was known to cause cinema goers to pass out due to the disturbed imagery and profanity. Jaws, on the other hand, became an instant summer thriller, largely because of its ability to challenge the unknown through its unique photography and perspectives on monster features. It would even coin the term blockbuster from the chaos that queues caused for blocks surrounding the cinemas. Hinchcliffe and the production team intended to encourage teenagers and young adults to follow the adventures of the new Fourth Doctor by incorporating staples of the dark and graphic content of horror into the show's formula, in the hopes of expanding the show's appeal to the untapped age markets. But even Hinchcliffe knew that leaning too close to the more adult and gruesome could risk alienating another demographic. The key to overcoming this obstacle, whilst still aiming for their desired effect, lay in the subgenre of Hammer Horror. Hammer Horror refers to a series of well-known horror classics produced by the British film company Hammer Film Productions. The films produced by Hammer are instantly recognisable and beloved by all age ranges, and helped to popularise the works of Frankenstein, Dracula, The Mummy, and countless others to the public awareness. Hammer Horror played a crucial role in influencing some of the 1970s most memorable episodes of Doctor Who. One of the most notable is 1976's The Brain of Morbius, where the Doctor and Sarah Jane Smith face off against the maniacal scientist Solon, who pledges themselves to crafting their master Morbius a new form from a mishmash of alien body parts. Obviously intended to be a unique and engaging retelling of Frankenstein, where the warped scientist Dr. Frankenstein creates a body from human corpses with their aid, in an experiment to create new life. However, going for such a bold artistic style within the format of a family-friendly television show was always likely to cause some friction. Hinchcliffe himself admitted, "I discovered that having made the series more adult and more realistic, we had run up against the thin dividing line of what was acceptable to Saturday tea time family and what is not." Such stories earned the production team several less than pleasant critics who would haunt the era, the most notable being Mary Whitehouse, a conservative activist who came onto the Who community's radars for her brutal reviews between 1975 and 1977. In one of the darkest cliffhangers of season 13, the fourth Doctor is attacked by an assassin who tries to forcibly drown him before the episode immediately cuts to credits. This moment alone received some of Doctor Who production office's most aggressive complaints. Whitehouse was among those who took the opportunity, saying, "The program contains some of the sickest and most horrific material ever seen on children's television." Hinchcliffe was no stranger to the criticism of Whitehouse by this point, however, and has always continued to defend his intentions, insisting, "I always felt that Mary Whitehouse thought of Doctor Who as a children's program for little children, and it wasn't. So she was really coming at the show from the wrong starting point." The Fourth Doctor era was nothing short of unique within the show. Its style and influence stands out as some of the most challenging and different in Doctor Who's history, for better or worse. While it's far from perfect, some works being shunned for their of-the-area racist values, see The Talons of Weng-Chiang, these episodes never fail to value the spirit of Doctor Who. In fact, the disturbing storylines and macabre imagery may have been exactly the sort of shake-up that the show needed to avoid becoming formulaic, bland, and predictable for audiences, and help to remind them that the stakes are real for the characters. The Doctor could die at any moment throughout their adventures, even in brutal and unceremonious ways. The villains of the era were allowed to demonstrate just how far they would go for success, and how nasty the consequences of their actions would be should they succeed. It's fair to wager, if you have a conversation with someone familiar with the classic series, the monsters that they'll talk to death are Sutekh the Destroyer or the maniacal Davros, not necessarily your Chumbleys or the Meerkas. These serials allowed for variously successful horror staples to influence the Doctor Who universe, and inspired memorable episodes that have stood the test of time in terms of their popularity with audiences. They were responsible for reminding audiences of the stakes and enticing viewers to watch science fiction retellings of universally renowned masterpieces, with Doctor Who tropes sprinkled throughout. Hinchcliffe's era of the show is responsible for some of the most beloved stories, including serials which have repeatedly topped fan polls for years after. A 2014 study for Doctor Who magazine rated every episode to date, 241 at that point, as part of their article called Top 10 Doctor Who Stories of All Time. When they totaled up viewer votes for their favourite stories and released the percentages of their popularity, 3 of Hinchcliffe's works made it into the top 10. Pyramids of Mars from 1975 gained 88.26% popularity. The Talons of Weng-Chiang, 1976, followed closely, 90.15% approval, and The Genesis of the Daleks, 1975, reached the third highest approval of all with 91.6%. With plot elements of these episodes still managing to rear their heads in modern Doctor Who, such as the ever-enduring Master and the Morbius Doctors, it's clear that the mix of Hammer horror into the formula inspired a new golden age of Doctor Who that continues to transcend its era. Despite its many recurring critics of the time, their appreciation and place in the fans' hearts have never been stronger. If you reckon there's anything that we feel we left out, please drop it into the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. You can catch us over on Twitter at WhoCulture. You can catch myself at Sean Ferrick on Twitter as well. You look after yourselves in the next however long it is until I see you again. Could be next week, could be yesterday. Keep it wibbly wobbly.